This is the Ray Ellis Podcast. Let's get behind the why. Hi there. Welcome back to Behind the Why. I'm Ray Ellis. It's my daughter, Jordana. Today, we're going to be talking about CRT. Again, we have to be joined by our friend Black online. This is going to be our first time having an interaction, so that'll be something new. But before we do that, I want to invite you to like and subscribe to the channel. And also, remember, we have a Patreon channel if you'd like to support what we're doing here and get this conversation out and going. So before we go, let's give our guest a minute to introduce himself. Black, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody who you are?
My name is Black. I'm from New York, live in Manhattan. And I believe in critical race theory, as you know. It is very legit, it's very real, and it's very much needed in today's society. And I'm very thankful for Albert Mohler, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, to administer the CRT to his congregants. So I'm very happy about what he's doing in the Southern Baptist Convention, and very happy to be here talking to you, Mr. Ray.
All right. Okay, we're going to get into this conversation then and just try to kind of unravel this a little bit. As you know, my position, I think that CRT at best is misused. It's mislabeled, and so therefore it cannot accomplish the things that it targets out to do. And as far as it being applied to the church, as you just referenced the Southern Baptist Union Convention there, I think it's actually a crippling step for what the church is actually commissioned to do. So we're going to get into critical race theory. Again, I'm joined by my daughter, Jordana. Mm-hmm. Go ahead and say hi to everybody for us.
Hello.
So we're going to be getting into this discussion. This all started because a couple of months ago, we did a presentation on CRT, and Mr. Black and I had some interchanges on the replies and decided we would bring this out and have this discussion out so everybody can take part of it. So what do you want to start this thing, Black? I'll give you first go as our guest.
Well, for me, critical race theory is simply this. Ultimately, everything is the white man's fault when it comes to black people's issues. That's the bottom line of critical race theory as far as I see it. Ultimately, everything is the white man's fault. And because of this, it was the white man in America who built the ships, went to Africa, bought the black slaves. Actually, they were kidnapped victims, brought them back and sold them on the shores of America into slavery, shadow slavery for 250 years. And then another 100 years, as you know, Jim Crow. So all of black Americans' problems stem from the transatlantic slave trade, shadow slavery, Jim Crow. And that was 100% done by the white man as far as building the ships, bringing the slaves, the kidnapped victims back to America and selling them into shadow slavery and Jim Crow. 100% of the laws throughout that period was white people towards blacks. It was not the other way around at all, zero. So that's why that's what critical race theory is to me, and that's why it's the white man's fault. Transatlantic slave trade, shadow slavery, Jim Crow.
Okay, I can see where you're coming from, and there is some legitimacy in what you're saying. However, the thing that causes a problem for the black man in America today is that the issues that we're dealing with are not issues that our forefathers dealt with 300 years ago. The America that you and I walk and talk and breathe in is not the same America that our forefathers were dumped in when they were brought here as slaves from Africa. There's this whole thing about where the problems of a person originates or has its genesis. And anytime you or I can take the responsibility of our own faults and then put that on someone else, what we're really doing is giving the authority of our life to the very persons that we say who is robbing it from us. So by you giving all this authority to the quote unquote white man, what you have done, you subjugate yourself to an idea. And the white man doesn't have anything to do with it. It's necessarily what your day-to-day function is. It's you operating under a faulty premise. That's how I see the crippling effect of CRT. Do you want to add anything to that, Jordana?
I think the one thing, I guess the problem I have with CRT too, is that it's putting all of the blame onto the white man.
Right.
But not taking into consideration even the wrong things that black people did to their own people at that same time.
At the same time.
So white men might have gone to Africa to get the slaves, but they were sold by other Africans.
Right.
And that's often just kind of swept away as being, well, yeah, that's not as big of a deal, but it is. It's just as wrong. So I think you have to take all the history together and not just put the finger on the white man, because blacks owned slaves. black sold slaves as well,
Yes. So you see where we coming from on this, Mr. Black, how the 2 points of view contradict each other there.
Yeah, well, just to your daughter, the transatlantic slave trade. Without the white man coming to the shores of Africa, there would have never been a transatlantic slave trade. So that transatlantic slave trade was 100% the fault of the white man, because if there was no white man with ships, there would have never, ever been a transatlantic slave trade. Also, for a fact, the white man gave the Africans guns, all these other things to continue their wars, to continue getting kidnapped victims. So the white man is partially the blame for slavery within Africa, and 100% the blame the white man for the transatlantic slave trade, and 100% responsible for chattel slavery laws and Jim Crow. So the white man, even in Africa's shores, he's responsible for that too.
What you're doing, my friend, is you're starting your discussion in the middle of the narrative. You're starting from a point where there are blacks being sold into slavery. So what you have to go back to is to look at this history of Africa as a nation, as the multiple nations that it was. I guess the easiest way, or the most common way I can give you an example, is to look at the American, what we call the American Indian, or Native American. We have a tendency to think of the American Indian as a single group, where in fact they were multiple nations living within the same geographical location. And what we had in Africa was the same thing. We had tribal Africa, where you had different nations living in the same geographical area, which were sworn enemies. And they were taking slaves of each other long before the Europeans showed up. They were killing and destroying each other's lives long before the Europeans showed up. What the Europeans did is came in and just added another chapter to that same horrid story. This was not something that originated in the heart of Europe, and all of a sudden Africa became this big harvest ground. Africa was always part of the story. Mm-hmm. It's the cradle of civilization. So if you go back to the beginning, you're going to find yourself on the African continent. And as you come forward, you'll see all these same stories retold depending on who is in the position of power at that time. And what you have at the beginning of what we will refer to as the American slave trade or the transatlantic slave trade is just one more chapter in a sad story of human history. So you can't start your narrative in the middle of the story. You can't start in the middle of the story. You have to tell the whole story.
Okay, let me ask you a question. No, that's okay. And your daughter can answer it too, doesn't matter. Could the transatlantic slave trade occur at all without the white man building ships and bringing them to the New World? Just that one question. Could the transatlantic slave trade exist at all without the white man 100% building the ships and going to Africa and bringing them back to the New World? So I'll take an answer from you or your daughter. Just that answer alone.
Absolutely, it could have. You understand when you're saying that what drives this is not the color of a person's skin. What drove this was greed.
Right. What came to my mind too is I think it totally could have happened because of human nature.
Right.
Somebody would have come up with it. There's nothing new under the sun. And long before the white man went to Africa to make this happen, like we said, there was slavery, there was evil being done to one another within that continent alone. So
if you just go back, you referenced earlier, we're talking about the Bible. To anyone in my listening audience, you know that I'm a Christian. I believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and I believe that God has sent His Son, Jesus Christ, as a point of Savior for all of us who will simply accept His grace. So what we're coming back to is we look at the Bible itself. You look at the human history that's recorded. A lot of that history in the Bible is recorded on the African continent. Mm-hmm. And so when you begin to look at these nations like Egypt and all those surrounding Iran and Iraq, all those countries are part of that geographical area. And so as you go forward into history, if you go forward into history, you begin to see the Muslim expanse. You see how slavery was done there and how people were taken and sold all over the world as the Muslim religion began to spread across the continent. So what we find is that this quest for power is common to the human creature. Mm-hmm. It is not inherent in those who have white skin, as no more is it inherent for those who have dark skin to be slaves. It is a human problem. We find no matter who is in the position of power, they have a tendency toward oppressing those who are of lesser power. If you look at what's going on in America today, Look at our seat of power today. And we go back to this whole seed of CRT, which feeds this mentality of systemic racism that supposedly exists in America. But when you look around in the positions of power in America, you don't see that. You don't see that as a trace. You see women in positions of power. You see women of color in positions of power. You see blacks in positions of power. You see all the spectrums of America in positions of power. So if we had this grand systemic problem that oppressed everybody who was non-white, that would not exist, even according to the definitions that CRT has developed themselves, i.e. that in CRT, common sense becomes the idea of the thought pattern that governs the majority rule. And according to that same theory, those who are in power will not allow laws that would do anything to dilute their power. So your own theory, in a greater sense of CRT, argues against its own legitimacy.
Okay, let me just say something. All historians say that the transatlantic slave trade to America could never, ever occur without the white man building ships and going to Africa. So I just want to add that. I understand what you're saying, like, hey, slavery was in Africa. Absolutely. But the fact remains, as historians 100% back, the transatlantic slave trade was 100% the white man's doing. Not the Africans. The white man did it, not the Africans. Every historian of his worth, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, any historian, absolutely. The transatlantic slave trade was 100% the white man's doing. So what
I don't disagree with you on that. I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying is you can't start in the middle of the narrative. It's like saying all of a sudden we get here now, we say that the problem that we have in abortion in this country, where we've had over 70 million babies aborted, and we're going to say, well, that is the white establishment's problem. And it's like, no. Although it began in the heart and the mind of this one white lady back in the 40s and 50s, today blacks are killing their babies at a higher rate than any other population group in America. That's not the white man that's driving them to do that. It's the blacks that are doing it to themselves. And that's what we have to look at when it comes to this greater idea. Yes, slavery was happening.
So you agree with me? You agree that the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to America was 100% the white man's doing. Am I correct?
I can say that. I don't know about the 100%, but I'll grant it to you for sake of discussion. Yeah, because I think they exploited a resource to fulfill their desires. Yes.
All right, we'll move on then, since you agree it is 100% the white man's fault. Now in America, to bring it back to the white man, because we don't have much time. Chattel slavery. Do you agree with this? That chattel slavery and Jim Crow, that's 350 years. 100% of all the laws that shadow enslaved black people in America and Jim Crow black for 350 years, 100% of all the laws, we're talking about untold thousands of laws, were 100% made by white people.
No.
Do you agree with that statement?
I do not. We had black representatives in Congress as far back, as far back as immediately after the Civil War. So no, I can't agree with that statement.
Okay, so name one law that black people made to either enslave themselves through chattel slavery or Jim Crow themselves. You said the white man is not 100% responsible for 100% of the laws. Can you name one law that black people did?
What I can say to you is that there are white people who have been evil, who have been in positions of power, who then created the black code and things of that nature that allow them to manipulate and control a legal system that impoverished and oppressed a certain segment of its population, i.e. in this conversation, black people. But at the same time, that's what I want you to understand, that these laws are the same laws that people like Dr. King, that even Malcolm X used, and people of that nature who used those same laws to then overturn the broken system, because the law itself was in place to be used, either good or bad. And it was the heart of the individual that used it that created the evil. So you don't want to sit here and paint with a broad paintbrush and say that it's all evil, because if that was the case, then you would not have had an arm for President Lincoln to to stand on when he decided that we would not allow slavery to take over the country. Contrary to popular belief, that was a battle for the rights of slavery in this nation, not whether the South wanted to be an independent nation. It was about whether or not slavery would stand. Right. So President Lincoln used the established laws of this land to say, no, that's not just. And he was able to mount up a war in the Union Army and overturn that in the same way that Dr. King was able to come back and say, you cannot deny me my rights because the laws of the land says as a citizen, I have these rights. And ultimately, we won the day. Why? Because the law was right.
Okay. I think you're missing my point. 100% of all the laws that enslaved black people in America, right? And 100% of the laws that Jim Crowed black people, who made those laws? We're just talking
what
about
I'm saying to you.
Yeah, that seems to be just beside the point.
No,
truly.
what I'm trying to get you to see, Mr. Black, is
question.
this. Wait, no. See, because your question is what we call, it's not a legitimate question, because you're asking me about what a segment of evil people did, and you're saying, well, that paints the whole picture, and that's not the case. If you want to look at law in America, you have to look at law in America. You can't say that, because these evil people who are of the Democrat Party in the South did these evil things, that makes all the laws in America evil. And you can't do that, because
or all the white people. Yeah,
because at the same time, the law worked against and for everybody there. And what happened is that you had a few people who had surrounded themselves with like-minded people and then used the law in such a way that they were able to violate the law, which is why during the civil rights movement, the greater law, the law of the Constitution, overthrew them because they were in violation of law. They wrote bad law. Mm-hmm. That's what you have to look at. You can't say, because these guys did that, then that makes it all bad. Well, yeah, everything those guys did were bad. I wouldn't expect the KKK to do anything good for black men.
Okay, so what you're saying is that all the laws that enslaved black people for 250 years and all the laws that Jim Crow black people for 100 years, that's 350 years of laws. You're saying you will not answer the question as far as who created those laws.
No, what I'm saying is that your scope is too narrow. You're taking a narrow aspect of the law, and you're saying what you're asking me is that were there white people who wrote those laws? And I would agree with you. Yes, there are absolutely white people who wrote the laws. It wouldn't make any sense to say that black people write the black code to enslave themselves. That's nonsensical. But what you have to understand is that the people who wrote those laws were outside of the law of the land when they wrote them. They were in violation of law in the same way you or I would be in violation of law. We decided to go into the bank down there in Manhattan and take people's money because we feel like we need it. We will be outside of the law. That's what these people were. They were outside of the law.
Okay, I understand. So you are agreeing with me once again that all the laws that enslaved blacks in America and all the laws that Jim Crow blacks, regardless of how many whites did it, you agree that white people did it, right?
What I'm saying, to make it plain, because I don't want you to take my words out of context, is wait. Let me finish my statement. I'm saying is that those people who did that, were they white? I would say yes, absolutely, they were white. However, they were in violation of law when they did it. Okay, so it wasn't a sanctioned law.
No, yeah, I understand. You're saying that they were in violation of whatever, but you agree that obviously 100% of the laws that enslaved blacks in America and Jim Crow blacks in America, white people did. You agree with that alone? I understand. Yeah, it was.
I agree. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. I don't have an argument with that at all. I say yes. The white Democrats of the South are the ones who created those laws. They absolutely did. Okay.
Now you said the South, right? Okay. So are you saying that there was no slavery in the North?
I'm saying that the law, that what you're referring to is those Jim Crow laws and those de facto segregation rules that applied even in northern states were all done by the same mindset that had their birth out of the Southern Democratic Party.
So you're saying are you saying all the slavery laws and all the Jim Crow laws were done by Democrats?
Yes.
Okay. The Democrat Party didn't come into existence until 1824, 1825. Am I correct?
Okay, they started off as, the term as we know it now as Democratic Party, yes. In the same way that the Republicans didn't get their name Republican until the 1860s, but they were always in power. They're always in existence.
All right, can you and your daughter tell me, in the 13 colonies, who created, because the 13 colonies, it was not a nation. We didn't become a nation until after the American Revolution, right? So all 13
Correct.
colonies had slavery, right? Then they had slave laws, right? Could you and your daughter answer, because back then there was no Republican or Democrat. Each colony was as a nation unto itself, 13. They all had slavery. They all had laws on the books about the Negroes being being slaves. So
I think that is incorrect. I think that's an incorrect statement.
Yeah.
When the 13 colonies came over from Europe, they were still operating under European law, and they had brought with them their indentured slaves. And when they got here, they brought that same pattern of imperialism with them. So when they took over the lands, they then did start to enslave some of the local Indians, and they brought with them the slaves, European slaves, white people who were brought as indentured slaves. But it became, I'm not sure the exact year. There's a book called The Story of Liberty that I would suggest you. I'll put it up on the screen later on. The Story of Liberty, that gives you this exact history. But what it finds out, what it details for you, is that slavery as we know it came into being as a process of economic supremacy, because it became cheaper for them to buy slaves out of Africa, and then it would be to try to enslave the indigenous population, because it was too easy for the Indians to reinsert themselves into their indigenous population. But the blacks stood out and were always black. And so they became an economic decision that was not part of the original 13 colony mandate. No, so that would be an error on your part to say that. There were certain colonies that were slavery. There were certain colonies within the. Go ahead.
Okay, I think you missed what I said, but let me state it more clear. 13 colonies, right? They all had laws on the book to enslave black people, correct?
No, that's a negative. That's not true. That's what I'm saying. It's not true.
Then how did they enslave black people in all 13 colonies if there was no laws on the books to enslave black people?
Well, that's what I just got to explain to you, the process and how that began. There were colonies originally where slavery was absolutely outlawed. It was absolutely outlawed, period. And so what we find...
No, hang on. So you're saying that in America, 13 colonies, there was colonies that outlawed slavery?
Yes.
So how could they have every historian? Every historian would tell you, right? Literally, they'll say all 13 colonies had black slaves. But you said that, hey, some colonies didn't have black slaves, so how could they have black slaves if you say they didn't?
What I'm saying to you is that at the founding of the colonies, that was not so. That was not the situation at all. What happened was that progressive over time, as men became again taken over the using of the resources, and greed and pride came into play. Those things began to grow and become a part of it. As we are labeling the African slave trade, that was something that grew out of this mess. It wasn't the original plan at all.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. So you agree that all 13 colonies had black slaves. You agree with that. That's a fact. You agree with that, right?
What I'm saying to you is all 13 colonies had slavery to some degree. I agree with you on that, but not in the way that you're describing slavery. You're talking about two different things. You're talking about indentured slavery, and then you're talking about chattel slavery. There's two different things.
Yeah, so we agree that all 13 colonies had black slaves. Who created those laws to keep those black slaves enslaved?
Oh, that's where we go back to that same mentality we talked about before. Nothing has changed. It's the same group of people. It was that same mindset that said that they were that elite mentality that allowed them to look at other a group of people in order to populate or to enrich themselves. And that's the same root that we've been talking about the whole time. Nothing has changed on that.
Okay, but didn't you and your daughter just say that the Democrats created the slave laws?
Yes.
Okay.
And they were in the same group of people. The same group.
Hang on. No, just hang on. I want you and your daughter to answer this, and it's an honest question. Name one Democrat in those 13 colonies. that had slaves.
Okay,
One Democrat.
you're playing word games, because what I want you to understand now, you just told me that. No, wait, Mr. Black, Mr. Black. The Democratic Party came into existence in what year? What year?
1824.
What year did the Democratic Party?
Yeah, 1824.
What year did the Republican Party come into existence? What year did the Republican Party come into existence?
1856.
18 what?
1856.
Okay, now listen to that. Those ideas existed under different names long before that date. So we're talking about an ideology. That's what you have to be honest with. You say, well, no Democrats. Well, no, because there wasn't a name Democrat. There was a time when there was no name America, but it was still here. The land was still here. So that's what we're looking at. We're talking about this idea.
Yeah, but you're blaming slavery on the Democrats in the South, and that's not true because all 13 colonies, the North.
The topic then was Jim Crow laws.
It's
and
the ideology that informed the Democratic South that has been around for years. It's that thought process. You can trace that back to many other countries too. And it didn't have the name Democrat. We're talking about the ideology behind that informs that democratic thought that was still there before the Democratic Party came into existence.
It's a rose by any other name. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. It's Shakespeare. It's a rose by any other name.
But you can't say, well, the Democrats started slavery when that's not true. All 13 colonies, over 100 years before the Democratic Party even existed, had slavery. That's what I'm saying. It's like,
no, and I agree with you on that, except for that what we were talking about at the time, we were talking about slavery in the Jim Crow South. And I said to you that the Jim Crow South created all those laws that we refer to as those racist laws in Jim Crow and Black Code. That all was born in the heart of the Democratic Party. Even the Ku Klux Klan came out of the heart of the Democratic Party.
Yeah. So are we talking about Jim Crow now?
That's where I thought we were going. That's where the conversation, when I made that original statement, we were talking about Jim Crow and the Black Code and how the blacks were being punished in the South.
Okay,
so when we talk about that, in
the North there was redlining. Who did that? Who created? If it wasn't 100% white people, once again, who created redlining in the North?
Okay, for purposes of the audience, go ahead and define redlining for everybody who's listening.
Redlining in the North is when blacks were basically confined to the worst parts of the cities throughout America, throughout the North, South. The government said, hey, blacks can only live in these red outlined zones. These are considered just for blacks. It's the lowest grade possible. And in that area, it was designated for black people. And whites wanted to move out. They couldn't move where black people were. So redlining is just a crappy place in every ghetto in America that the government and banks made blacks stay. That's what redlining is. The crappiest part of the ghettos is white people.
Again, we have to look at this in the totality. Now, were there what we call that de facto desegregation? Did those things happen? Absolutely. Absolutely, those things happen. And the people who did it, they were racist, or as we call racists today, or race elitists, however, whatever term we want to use them, they were. And the people who did that, they were white. Absolutely. But again, look at the ideology that we're talking about. And it's the same ideological group that we know as the Democratic Party. It's the Liberal Democratic Party. It's the same group. That is the group that caused our Abraham Lincoln to take the stand that he did. It's the same group that caused Frederick Douglass to take the stand that he did as the famous abolitionist that he was. It's the same group that caused Booker T. Washington to establish Tuskegee Institute and says, no, we're going to do this ourselves because the people around us won't let us do it. So therefore, we don't need their permission to be great. We'll just demonstrate our greatness because that's who we are.
So you're saying the Democrat people created redlining too? Not the Republican whites, but the white Democrats in the North. So in the South, they had straight up Jim Crow, right? In the North, they had redlining. You're saying that the Democrats, not white people in general, but white Democrats. Can you back that with any link?
Look at your history. Yes, look at your history. The history is so well documented in this country. It's amazing that anybody doesn't know it. Like I said, The Death of a Nation, right? No, The Birth of a Nation. We look at that film, debuted in the White House with a Democratic president. And immediately after that, what did we see the rise of? The KKK. A Democratic president and his group of people party. We see the oppression of the blacks, especially specifically in the South, with the Tuskegee, the syphilis test. Black Democrats, white Democrats. I'm sorry. We go on. We see the pushing of abortion, targeting the black community. White Democrats. All these evils that you're talking about has their root, yes, in the heart of the white Democrat philosophy. So when we start talking history, this is what we as black people have to do. We have to look at our history and stop looking at it through the lens of what we want it to be and realize what it really was. And then we can grow up and change and become the people we need to be. It's only then we can rise up and become the greatness that people like Booker T. Washington saw. And even who is it? Malcolm X, his famous quote on liberalism, that the worst thing for the black man is a liberal white man.
The white liberal.
So we don't need that kind of help, because that help pushes you down. It don't pick you up. And that's what I'm trying to get you to understand. That we have to look at this in this great big picture, not these little microscopic pictures where we can focus on this issue or that issue, while at the same time ignoring the trend that has been destroying our people.
Well, okay, I think that I've never heard of redlining being a Democratic Party since it was all up north. But because you keep saying on this Democrat, Larry Elder type stuff, right? Okay, let's pick your most famous Republican, Abraham Lincoln, for you and your daughter. Was Abraham Lincoln a white racist? Okay, no, I asked you, this is you and your daughter, right? Since you want to pick on Democrats, and it's no. Was Abraham Lincoln a racist? You and your daughter can answer. It's fine.
Was he a racist?
Yeah, when was Abraham Lincoln a racist?
I have never seen anything to suggest that Abraham Lincoln was a racist. I don't know what you. I'm not sure what you're. And not in the tradition that we're talking. Not in the context we're talking now. I would say no.
Okay, and how about your daughter? Do you think Abraham Lincoln was a racist? A Republican
I would say
racist?
no. Not in the sense of racism as we're talking about it now. I would say no.
Oh, okay. That's interesting because you're biracial, right?
Last I checked,
right?
Yep.
Okay. No, Abraham Lincoln said, right? You can look it up, Google it. He called mixed people mixed breed bastards. He said he didn't want blacks and whites to mix because they would create mixed breed bastards that one day would challenge the white man. This is his own words. He also said, this is what he said about you if you were back then. He would call you a mixed breed bastard. I mean, this is how racist. Abraham Lincoln is disgusting. He also said that he wanted to send black people back to Africa, and if not Africa, to Haiti or Honduras. And he tried.
Okay, you're missing context. You're missing context. You're missing context. I remember the conversation you're referring to, and you're not taking in the context of the conversation. The conversation was not that he wanted to get rid of blacks. The question was put forth about blacks leaving America and going back. And he was for that idea for those who wanted to go back. He was not against that idea. And so you're looking at it, you got to take it into full context.
No. Okay, Mr. Ray, you're absolutely wrong. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. He was racist. He said, okay, let me look up the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858. You know what he said? He said that he believed in white supremacy and that the white man should always be over the black man. He should always have the inferior position in America. This is Lincoln-Douglas debate. This is the Republican Abraham Lincoln. He said it. He said that he believed in
Mr.
white supremacy.
Mr. Black, hold on for a second. Yeah. I'm not arguing in the perfection of Abraham Lincoln. I'm not arguing for that. That's not my argument.
But you said he was.
I don't think he was racist in this. I agree with that statement.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that, again, on the big picture of what CRT is and how it affects the American black today, is that it cripples us because it takes the responsibility of life away from ourselves and gives it to someone else. The fact that Abraham Lincoln may have said some things that I don't agree with, I don't argue with that. I don't have any argument with that. He's not perfect. He's a man. And that would be my argument, is that the evils that we see in CRT are not limited to a race or an ethnic group, as we would better say. It's not even limited to a particular cultural group, but it is indicative to man who has fallen in sin. And so you will find, no matter who you follow around long enough, they're going to say some very stupid things. They're going to say some very evil things, because man in itself is evil. Mm-hmm. You had mentioned earlier about the Bible, and I'll say this before we transition off of this, is that, the Bible is very clear that the heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? The Bible is clear that man is conceived and brought forth in sin. So there's nobody who's perfect. The only man who ever was perfect was Jesus Christ, who was born of a virgin, brought forth by the Holy Spirit of God to become the sacrifice for all of mankind. So therefore, he took on the sins of man. Now, every other man that you can label, whether you're talking about me or you or Abraham Lincoln, there will be things that we will say and do that's going to be contrary to what's right and contrary to the will of God. But what you have to look at is the overall pattern of a person's life and say, what did this person do or say? We're right up against the clock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the last word to go out on this, and then we'll have to plan a second time we can get together again and continue this discussion. What do you say?
Okay. So you want me to close right now with a statement?
Yeah, go ahead and make your statement. We'll give you the last word, and then we'll do it, and then we'll close out.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. Well, you and your daughter both just stated that Abraham Lincoln was not racist, right? Anybody can listen to this, and obviously he was a racist. He was a Republican and a racist. Once again, he said that he believed in white supremacy and that black man should always hold an inferior position. And he said mixed people were mixed breed bastards, and he didn't want that to happen because mixed people being bastards, because black and white mixing would one day challenge the white man. That's easy. Go after this debate and conversation. Look up Lincoln Douglas debates 1858. He said it. Also, you agreed that 100% of the transatlantic slave trade, as far as building ships, buying kidnapped victims, bringing them back, white people. You also agree that 100% of all the laws of chattel slavery and Jim Crow, regardless of there's Democrats or not, you agree that 100% of all the chattel slave laws and Jim Crow were black. And you agreed redlining and all that other good stuff that was supremely racist was done by white people. So this debate, I don't understand. You agree everyone was white. So CRT is correct. It's white people. You, all through this debate, you agree with everything I said. White people did the transatlantic slave trade 100% of the chattel slavery laws, 100% of the Jim Crow laws. Abraham Lincoln was a racist. So CRT is correct, and I think this debate's done. And thank you very much, Mr. Ray, and your wonderful daughter. I think you're amazing, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Black. We'll have to continue this conversation at a later date. But Jordana, you want to have some closing words before we go?
I think the one thing that comes to my mind with this is because historically you can look, and I would agree 100%, white people did some evil things. I'd also agree that other people, color groups did too. Okay? People are people. And my problem with CRT is simply that it's always pointing at the white person. And so what is that doing for the black community today?
Exactly.
So my point is, I don't care if it does a disservice to black people, because it's always, you're the victim. Let's blame the oppressor. What do you have? I just don't see the fruit in it.
And we start this conversation talking about CRT as a principle, as a theory, and we kind of drifted off and began to look at some finer points throughout history, which changes the tone and tenor of the conversation. But I agree with Mr. Black that the people who did these things were white. That's not the point. That's a historical fact. The problem that we're looking at today, though, has nothing to do with the fact that the white man owned the ship that brought a slave to America. Mm-hmm. The problem we have now is that it's the black man that's shooting and killing himself in the larger inner cities of America. It's the black man who's killing his babies at a rate of 3 times as many as all the other races of this nation, because we have bought a lie that's been given to us again by the Democratic Party that we need to kill our babies in order for ourselves to be happy and whole. We go back to the 40s and the 50s before this mentality really began to kick in, and we find that it was the black family that was really rising in the middle of the middle class. And we have bought this lie, and we have tumbled from the heights that we had achieved. And now we find ourselves really kind of floundering as a group of people. And it's until we can get the courage to look in the mirror and say, as Michael Jackson said in his famous song, "I'm starting with the man in the mirror," there's never going to be a change for us as Black people in this country. So we went a little long today. We're up a little about almost 15 minutes over our normal time. So I want to thank everybody for staying tuned with us, join us in this conversation. I appreciate again our guest, Mr. Black, and hope this conversation stimulated you to do some thinking and some reading of yourself. But I do want you to be encouraged to understand that the truth will always be there to set you free. The Word of God is the foundation for all righteousness. And what you find is when people transgress from that, they find themselves in trouble, whether it's a person, a family, or a nation. The further we get away from God's Word, the further into trouble we find ourselves. Well, until next time, I want you guys stay tuned to the piece. Stay at it, because this nation needs people who know the truth and know the foundation of righteousness. So until next time, peace.